think anti-immigrant sentiment is successful because so many people are anxious about the future. People feel that there's a shortage of affordable housing. People feel there's queues for health services, for public transport, that there's too much pressure. And since austerity policies have cut back the supply of many of these things, that sentiment has increased. In fact, what we know from the economic literature is that immigrants contribute to the solutions to these problems. They build the houses, they help provide care in hospitals and doctors and nurses, elderly care, that they help drive and operate public transport. So they're not to blame, they're often part of the solution. And we also know that they don't undermine wages, that they contribute more to taxes than they take out in social benefits, because they tend to be typically working age. They're not elderly, they're not young and being cared for by the state. But we do need, I think, a migration bargain in which we control migrants effectively, we document them, we know who they are, we ensure they pay tax, that they abide by the laws of our land, but also with that we accept more, because we need more. In Europe particularly, we have, and in the US as well, we have aging societies, we need elderly care, and a growing share of our needs of what economists call non-tradable services, so care services, hospitality services, and others that people must do and cannot be done remotely. But our workforces are contracting. We have rapidly aging societies and less people entering the workforce. So there's no doubt we will need them for that. But we also need them to help us make our societies more dynamic, because they are overrepresented, they're more active in small business creation, in innovation. It's no accident that the most dynamic cities have the highest share of immigrants in them. And it's also no accident they like immigrants, typically. The places that are most anti-immigrant typically are the places with the least immigrants. And the countries in Europe that are the most anti-immigrant have the lowest share of immigrants. So it's not when we're close to them and we see them being effective that we become anti-immigrant. It's when we fear the other. The other reason for anti-immigrant sentiment, I think, is a conflation, a mixing up of views on refugees and immigrants. Economic immigrants and students, we have the choice of how many we want. That's our national democratic decision. We need to make those choices more wisely, I think. When it comes to refugees, there's international law. And we need to ask whether these people are in legitimate fear of their lives or persecution. And if they are, to share the burden amongst European countries and amongst other countries more fairly. But this is a different question to the question of what are our attitude to other immigrants. I think there are many good examples, and this changes over time. But the Americas have had this history. Brazil, of course, is a very mixed society. Canada and the US have been societies of immigrants. The US has now turned against immigrants. Canada, not so much. Australia is another good example. And European countries themselves. The dynamic cities in Europe are very high shares of immigrants. Germany's done an amazing job, I think, in accepting well over 1 million Syrian refugees. Europe's now accepted well over 5 million Ukrainian refugees very effectively. And this has been good for Europe, and of course it's been good for the refugees. Migrants in general who are not refugees come for economic reasons, they come for studying, they come for family reunification reasons, and that's a decision for national governments to take as to how many they want. Refugees come because they're in legitimate fear of their lives or persecution, and that needs to be tested to ensure that economic migrants are not slipping through refugee channels, and we know how to do that in societies. the question of whether, if refugees stay for a long time, do they get residence and do they become economic migrants, is an important one, particularly when you have high numbers of refugees. This first and foremost depends on what's happening in their home countries. And we have an interesting case now of Syria, very pleasantly becoming a society where people can go back to. And it'll be very interesting to see how many Syrians go back. Ukraine, hopefully the same thing will happen, and I think the Ukrainians will go back when it's safe to do so for them. Afghanistan and Sudan and other places are much further away in terms of when people go back. And once people have been in a society for a long time and maybe had children in that society, it gets more and more difficult to go back. But I have had the personal experience of having been South African, fought in the anti-apartheid struggle, left South Africa, couldn't go back for 10 years. And then the miracle of President Mandela happened, and he invited me to be part of his government, and I went back. I've left again as an economic migrant to work in Britain, to work in the US, and so on. But in my own personal experience, I've seen how this is possible. And also in my parents' and grandparents' experience, similar things happened. So I think people do move if they have the opportunity to go back to their places.